Well, hey, everybody. I'm Lisa Keeker. I'm the founder and CEO of Studio Grow. Welcome to the business of boutique fitness. I am joined by the lovely Matt Hanton. We are at episode 2 of Uncomfortable Conversations that you are stuck having as a studio owner.
The most fun thing to talk about,
I mean,
right?
Sometimes really awkward and uncomfortable things are fabulous to talk about because you know what? You're going to face them. And sometimes all you can do is laugh and just say, I'm going to roll with the punches on this. Now, in episode 1, we covered business conversations, spending a lot of time talking about pricing and rent. Now we're getting into team conversations. And I feel like team conversations are the tough ones. We tie a lot of our emotions up in this. And for some of us, it's just hard to even have a really frank conversation with a family member, a friend. Now we're adding in someone who we rely on from work, adding in someone that we are really terrified they may leave with clients or part of our business. And that anxiety is just magnified enormously.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It would be great if people were as black and white as a lease or as black and white as a product stack of memberships, but we're complicated people, right?
Yeah. And you know what? That's what makes people fun. I mean, it's like literally, it's the best part of it. So let's dive in. I want to start with the tone of conversations because we're going to talk like difficult conversations in a moment. But before we even do, I think it's really important that you understand that the conversations that lead up to difficult conversations are as important as the difficult conversation itself. In fact, they may even be more important because you've set a tone for what to expect in your studio. When it comes to the tones of how we converse with team members, I feel like we see two things. We see horrible bosses, and we're like, oh my God, this is like, the worst boss in the world. And we see like Mother Teresa as a boss, and there's nothing else. I mean, and it's like, in reality, there is some mix of these that we've got to be where there is an ability to view someone in a very relational way. There's a temptation to review, I think, team members sometimes very transactionally. Team members are not a lease. They are not a do this and it's done. They are a human being. Okay, so I want to be crystal clear as we're going into this, that these are relational conversations. The first assumption is that you're building a relationship. But the second assumption is that you're having a lot of smaller conversations with radical candor on this. Did you read the book Radical Candor?
I've not yet, but I'm excited to.
Oh my gosh, so it's one of my favorite books. I can say I listened to it the first time, ironically, driving to see Lily and her mom, Amber, with Kit was like a newborn. They were staying up for the summer in Annapolis. And I was driving up and I listened to the first half of it the whole way up on my drive since it was going through DC, which took forever. And I kept pulling over because it was just me and the baby in the car. And I was like taking notes and I was like reading into my voice notes going, whoa, why did I never stop? Why have I never thought of a willingness just to be candid with someone of what was going on? Not to put an enormous amount of pressure, not to put an enormous amount of anxiety around this, but to just be candid with what was happening.
Absolutely. And I think that we can almost be doing people a disservice when we're not candid with them, right? And I kind of have this thought in my mind whenever I'm approaching these difficult conversations that if there are going to be any major surprises in this conversation for the person that I'm talking to, I have probably not done my due diligence around the pre-talks, right? Absolutely. They should have heard this before this conversation, right? So there shouldn't be surprises and I should be candid. So this was something I had to learn. I'll be very transparent and very honest. When I first started managing teams, I was 25 years old. People in my team were in their 40s, 50s, had been there for a long time. I'd never done it before. So this is how I would originally approach difficult conversations, right? And this is very clearly an example of what not to do, right? I would say, Lise, how you going? Oh, I've loved working with you so much. You're so great. You're honestly like the best staff member that I've ever worked with in my entire life. You're basically perfect. Like I could go on and on for hours about how brilliant you are. If you could maybe if it's not too much of a drama, think about potentially not stealing from the cash register. That That would be great, but also if that's too much, don't worry about it because you're perfect and I love you and I should probably give you a raise soon.
Oh, it's so true.
An example of how not to have this conversation and how not to be candid.
I mean, I think it makes sense. We're scared of hurting people's feelings. Nobody wants, well, if you're listening to this, I don't think you want to be obnoxious to people. I don't think you're seeking to be rude. I think you want to have good relationships with those around you. But candidness, whether you're talking to your spouse, whether you're talking to your parent, whether you're talking to a best friend, whether you're talking to a team member, that's probably the most respectful thing you can do in a relationship.
That's the word. Respect.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I think there's a recognition, every single person on your team is a unique individual. We talked about that transactional versus relational relationships that you see. One of the most important things is going to be a willingness to say, I'm going to meet you where you're at. You are going to have different strengths. You're going to have different weaknesses. You're going to have different opportunities than anyone else. I'm going to come to you with respect when I go in and have to have these conversations. So I'm going to be respectful when it's a strength that I want you to magnify. I'm also going to be equally respectful when it is a weakness or an opportunity that I see for you. And I think a key thing is coming with an element of respect, not fawning, or as my child would say, not glazing somebody, but instead, like, I'm going to walk with you with respect. I do believe in you. I do believe you're an extraordinary team member, but this is something that I really think we've got to see a shift in. This is what's going to get you to X, Y, and Z. One interesting thing in the book Radical Candor that is spoken about on there is they talk about the willingness for a leader to receive criticism or feedback themselves. This is a conversation. I've had a lot with people because here at Studio Grow, I ask for a lot of feedback, and my leadership team knows that I am asking them to give me very direct feedback, and it's almost always uncomfortable for people when they first start with us. That they're like, "Wait, you want me to tell you, and you're the boss, you own the company, you control my paycheck. You want me to tell you when you're doing something wrong?" And I'm like, I'm human. Yeah. I'm going to do plenty wrong. Like, I need you to give me that feedback. When you start by asking people to give you feedback, you do two things. One, you're going to learn to be on the receiving end of feedback, and that is a critical skill set. You're going to hear like what doesn't work, what does work, what really makes you feel good, what really makes you take action and be like, hey, that was really valuable. The second thing is, it puts your team in a place of understanding that giving a feedback is normal. Not actually criticism, it is feedback. I think it's one of the most important things as a leader you can set. And if this is something where you're like, hey, I'm really nervous about this, that's where I would honestly start. Yeah, I just think start there, start with you. Second thing on this, be direct. I love reading stories about Steve Jobs. He is the exact opposite of a boss as I will ever be. But I have met people who worked directly for him over the years, and the conversations I've had consistently mimic the stories that you read, that you never worried what he was thinking because he was always willing to say it. And so while he was brutally direct because he was holding you to your best standards. And it was interesting as I've met members of his team over the years to have them tell me things like, hey, it never hurt my feelings when he said, this is terrible. Instead, it's like they said, he went, hey, they said this was terrible because I could do better. And it's what forced me to become better on this one. So I think directness is key. There's a lot of different variations on how to give feedback. I despise the compliment sandwich. We were talking about this before.
Not a fan.
I love the fact Ben Horowitz, a brilliant private equity guy, venture capitalist, calls this the shit sandwich. And I think it's one of the truest and most realistic statements on this one. It's the idea that you have a compliment, a criticism, and a compliment. And I think, there's truth that you got to have a ratio of positive feedback to negative feedback. I think there's some truth to where this goes. But if you always start with the compliment, problem, compliment on this one, I don't even think my kids would see through that. Like, I think my kids would view that as disingenuous. And certainly, I think most professionals, that's what concerns me the most, is that people look at this and they're like, ooh, that's a falsehood.
Yep. And I think that we don't have to intertwine kindness with positive feedback, right? We can still deliver a hard to hear message in a kind way. So the language that we use, and to your first point, the tone that we use can go a long way in delivering the kindness aspect of that ratio without the messaging needing to get cloudy and confusing by throwing in potentially unrelated compliments.
Yeah. One thing I think you're trying to get out of this, and this is a key thing when I'm giving someone feedback, when I'm giving them something that I know needs to shift within them, it's oftentimes because I'm trying to build them and bring them more from a doer, someone who's going to check all my boxes, who's going to be capable of doing, to someone who is actually a decision maker. Someone who is going to be able to step ahead, and the next time they're in a situation, they're going to be like, I have decisive action I can take, whether it's with their own time, whether it's with a client, whether it's with another team member, that they're able to say, this should be my priority over X, Y, and Z. The way I speak to this client should be prefaced with this, or this. The way I handle this team member should begin here. I think that's such a critical piece of recognizing that in doing this, you're not just telling someone stop or do. You're telling them to decide and decide consistently. Now, talk to me a little bit about the SBI model.
Yeah, I love this model. So it's the SBI model. We love an anagram in fitness. So situation, behavior, impact, right? Situation, behavior, impact. And the reason why I really like this is that it removes that sort of personal element to having these challenging conversations, right? A lot of the time we hear this feedback and we take it as a personal attack, right? Like you're having a go at me as Matt, when that is not it at all, right? It's the situation, it's the behavior, and it's the impact. So situations contextualize the environment that the feedback relates to, right? So when you find yourself in this situation, this is how we respond. The response is the behavior, right? So that is something that is not a reflection on you, your values, who you are as a person. It's a choice that you can make in terms of how you respond. So that's your behavior. And then the impact is basically the why. Why is it important that I make that decision to respond to that situation with that behavior, right? That just kind of wraps everything up in a bow so that they can understand the impact of their decision making and why we're trying to encourage them to, think differently and shift it.
And I love all of this because chances are, if you're having these kinds of conversations, and these are regular points of feedback. And actually, let's stop for just a second. Let me ask you this. How often are you giving people feedback?
I love to foster an environment that's rooted in feedback for everyone. So it's constant.
I mean, for me, this is something where, first of all, with my core team members, I meet with them every single week. And so, there's opportunities for feedback every week, if not in some cases on a daily basis. We also do this inside of team reviews. For studio owner, an average studio owner, I typically say twice a year is critical for team reviews. Although, you may have certain roles that need to be even quarterly on where this is, where you can say, I'm going to give much more intensive feedback. I'm going to give much more intensive growth plans for you on this one. What did you find is the sweet spot for your team members?
Well, I think that there's formal feedback like that, right? I've always loved a quarterly cadence to that with one annual that's kind of like the really meaty one, which can kind of relate to price increases and stuff, which not price increases, compensation increases, which we'll get into. But I mean, the formal and informal feedback, the informal is constant, right? Whenever, hey, Matt, I did this. Thank you. Great job. Love your work, whatever it may be, right? But the formal, getting that cadence right, it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, but I love a quarterly cadence.
Yeah. I think that's a critical thing, is to make this normal. I think that's what you really want to do. And the fact of the matter is, if you're doing all of these things, you've got informal feedback that you're very comfortable in giving, but you've got formal feedback, whether quarterly, biannually, for sure annually, at the very minimum, every member of the team gets it annually. This is an absolute critical thing. Now, this leads us into a conversation that hopefully, we get to have some level of comfort having, because this is one that I would say is second only to price increases. And that's what happens if you have to make a change in staff compensation. I have seen many studios that come to me and tell me they're paying their staff 50, 60, 70% of their revenue. And that does not add up in any model. Like you can go talk to any business school professor. You can go talk to anyone that has done this for many years in service-based industries. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable, and it's not going to be carried through. So I think the first question is, how do you know you need to change your staff compensation?
You've got to know your numbers. That's where it all starts.
Yeah.
Right? So let's start there.
Yep. So staff compensation, two options. You can go up, which hopefully, if you're priced right, you're thinking of on an annual basis. Just like you're thinking about raising your prices, you're recognizing your team as well needs annual raises that are going forward. However, that assumes that they are priced correctly to begin with going into that annual raise. For a decent number of people, though, there's going to be a moment where they're going to have certain instructors that they have been paying way too much money for. And it's time to have a very different conversation, which is, hey, I do actually need to cut your compensation. I need you to get in line with what industry standards, what my standards are going to be. This is a very different conversation because I think for a lot of people, it can feel like it's blindsiding.
Yes.
Yeah. When you look at this and you think, hey, this is a conversation that we have to go into, what's the first things in your mind that are going to be critical to go into the conversation with?
Yeah, I have to really understand why I'm having this conversation firstly, right? So like you said, there are a number of options here. I can be increasing, I can be decreasing, I can be doing nothing, right? I can be leaving it untouched. I can be giving a smaller increase than I am to other team members with a view of eventually catching up and bridging that gap, like you just mentioned. So why am I doing this, right? I also have to understand that as much as we love what we do and we do it because we're passionate about it, we do also do it so that we can pay our bills.
Yeah, we do need to earn a living.
We need to earn a living, right? We need food on the table. So I need to understand that this is a sensitive conversation for people as well. And kind of like I was alluding to earlier, it's about separating the person from the job, right? And the realities of the role. Because if that person left the role, would you be recruiting someone into it at the same price point? Right? Would you be advertising that role at that same level, or would you be decreasing it, increasing it?
Yeah,
Where is that?
That tells
at?
you really where you need to be.
Yeah.
Incredibly, incredibly important. Benchmarks. Let's just talk about some basic benchmarks. From a service-based industry perspective, we typically take revenue and we break it down into 4 components. 30% of your revenue should go towards profits. 30% should go towards overhead. That's going to include any overhead team members. So front desk team members, a sales manager, housekeeping, things of the like. And then 30% should go towards practitioner costs. By the way, that includes any classes you as a studio owner, any privates you as a studio owner are teaching, they're paid for there. That means for my instructors, which are oftentimes where I'm really having to consider this, compensation shift and change, it's where 99% of the time it's happening, we're going to need to really consider where do they need to be. Now, I think really interesting, if you're running numbers like Soul Cycles, you really can be paying somebody $300, $400, $500 an hour.
Yeah.
Like that's actually possible. Okay, so I want to say that for someone who's like, wait a second, like, am I going to have to pay a superstar instructor, $50 an hour? It really depends on what your revenue and numbers are. We're saying that that's going to average roughly 30% of the revenue brought in. So, yes, if you are bringing someone in where you're like, hey, I am paying, I'm receiving $250. You could conceivably be paying $80 for that. What I don't want you to do is be getting $125 an hour for private and paying someone $80, in which case you are likely losing money after taxes on this deal. Okay. I think that's a critical thing to recognize, that that is the benchmark that you're going into, but that you've got opportunities. There's a lot of range within that benchmark on there. So if we've got this, and I am looking and I'm saying I've got to shift and change prices, a few things. First of all, what are some things you want to have going into the conversation?
In terms of, you want to have all your cards laid out in front of you, right? You really want to understand exactly where you're coming from. You want to make sure that people know that this is the basis of the conversation as well, because people like to prepare for this, right? People want to be able to demonstrate their performance, their success, totally. So don't spring this conversation on anyone, right? But you also have to understand that you have avenues that you can take here, right? There are so many different options that you can approach to how you deliver compensation changes for your team. For example, maybe I don't want to necessarily adjust the pay rate, like the number associated with you, but maybe I could put you on a salary instead of doing an hourly rate. So you get some guaranteed income, right? But when I phase it out, it's going to work better in my favor.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. When I come in, there's a few things I've always had. First thing is your transparent pricing graphic we talked about in episode 1, where you break down what everything costs. I've always had this. It is an interesting conversation that I've had over the years, because I remember, never will forget the first time this asked. I had a team member say, I really want it. It was a significant, like a 30% raise, and they were very well paid. This was not a poorly paid individual. They were making almost as much as the new doctor in town. And I was like, okay. I was like, let's run the numbers on this. And it's how we actually wound up starting our transparent pricing graphics in our studios. Is I made it for my team first. And I said, this is this, and this. So I don't make any money if I give you that raise. In fact, I lose money. So I've got a little bit of a problem here on this. Are you willing, if we go up pricing by 30%? Are you willing to sell that to your team, or your clients? Do you feel like, instead of, let's just assume it was $100 session for, are you willing to now sell it at $130? And my team sort of all froze. Like, when the numbers were in front of them, it's a very different experience. Second thing is, if you've got competitors that they're going to benchmark against you, and most people will, recognize it's always going to be an hourly rate. So if somebody comes to me and they say, Studio A is paying $75 an hour and you're paying $50 an hour, it looks very different if I'm going to salary them or I'm going to be giving them 5 hours in a row. If they go to the first studio, they may pay them $75 an hour, but it takes 30 minutes to get there and it takes 15 minutes early, and I've got that 45 minutes on either times. Y'all, that's $25 an hour in the end, roughly.
Or there's an hour break in between where they just have to sit there and twiddle their thumb.
And have nothing? Like, you've got to put all those numbers down on paper. So I actually do the cumulative rate. This is travel time included. This is pre-class time included. This is what you're actually earning at Studio A. By the way, I just gave you 5 hours. I might be paying you $50 on this one. You might have, an hour and a half of additional travel time and an early time that's there. That means that you're probably earning $45 an hour. So you're earning $20 more an hour more than working with me. It's got to be in context. I think that's such a critical piece. So I want to have a matrix that shows how we actually stack up, not on an hourly rate, but in a breakdown of overall time. Do you do things like, provide people 3 hours a month that goes towards, class prep time, private session prep time? Do you offer benefits? Like, these all go into this. So when I build out a benefits package, like, I build out all of those things. One of my favorite things is to salary people. You don't have to salary people full time. I want to be crystal clear. That's the first question. You can do a 5-hour-a-week salary, do an 8-hour-a-week salary, 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week. You get to make up what a salary is. But this becomes, in a sense, a retainer for somebody where they're going to be able to go in and start on this. And what a difference that makes. You might decide that, hey, anyone who's teaching, more than 20 hours a week, you're going to pay for half of their health insurance. That's a big, easy win right there where that's a benefit. And you start to build these things in. Now, sometimes you just have to have a hard conversation that says, it doesn't matter. The math doesn't add up. Like, you show your transparent pricing graphic and you're like, I'm losing money on every single session you teach and I can't do this anymore. And you will have to be okay that some people are going to say, sorry, I'm just not willing to do that. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one I'll throw in there too, which can be really a value add for our team members, is growth trajectories and opportunities to develop, earn more. But it doesn't just have to be in terms of a role title or something like that. It can be peak times, peak class times, different working days. You get Saturdays and Sundays off, right? There can be transferable skills if they're a Pilates instructor for X number of hours per week, but in their actual job, they work in customer service, whatever it may be. There's transferable skills that they can pick up in your studio, which are hugely valuable for them.
Yeah, when you start to break it down this way, it changes the conversation significantly. Yeah, it's a hard conversation. It's a conversation where you're going to have to go in with radical candor, honesty, and complete transparency. You're going to have to be transparent about the fact that you're a business that has to be profitable because you want to be a business that's going to be there for the long haul. You're going to have to be open about the fact that this is a choice you have to make. And you can come to a meeting point, I think, oftentimes when you start to consider some of these other options, because this is a negotiation, a phenomenal negotiation. Are you going on to salary? Are you getting additional benefits? Are you getting those incredible opportunities that are beyond just money? Because guys, money matters and we talk about money a lot, but oftentimes what sways people has nothing to do with money. I mean, it's so many other things that we're dealing with. Now, we've hit 2 of our 3 sectors. We're coming up to part 3 next. We're going to talk about tough conversations with clients. One that I am eager to dive deep into. Now, guys, if you have been listening to us or watching us, whether it's on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, please go on ahead, click subscribe. Make sure you share this with other studio owners, even team members that are dealing with tough conversations on this one. We can't wait to see how you're going to take these conversations and hopefully make them so much easier.